What's up, everybody? So we're out in the shop with another Shop Talk Tuesday, but on a Thursday because I didn't release it on a Tuesday. I'm releasing it on a Thursday. Now, in this episode, we are going to be heat treating the Farrier's Rasp build. Now, in the last episode, I talked about that in this episode, I was going to tell you why doing a file or a Farrier's Rasp knife would be a first-time person or first-time knife maker's perfect thing to do. Now, a lot of people tell you, hey, get known steel, and that is absolutely true. Get something like 1084, get something like 1080. Those are perfect first time, even 5160, stuff like that. Those are perfect first time knife maker steels if you're going to go out and buy the actual steel. But if you're going to do like what I did and take a file that you have and turn it into a knife as your first knife, because that's what you had readily available, and you wanted to make a knife, I'm going to tell you why it is super simple. Now, okay, if you're going to make a knife and you don't have a forge, a file and a Farrier's Rasp is the way to go. The steel is already heat treated. So all you got to do is keep it cool the entire time that you're cutting it out. You're grinding in your bevels, you're doing all that stuff, you're getting it to this point right here. All you got to do is keep it cool during that process, and then whenever you get to this point, all you got to do is put it in your oven and temper it at 400 degrees for 2 hours, and boom, you got a tempered piece of steel. And then you put a handle on it, you put an edge on it, you got yourself a knife, you done made your first knife, and all you used was some tools and an oven. You didn't have to heat treat it, you didn't have to quench it, none of that stuff, because it was already heat treated. So it's the perfect thing for somebody who just wants to try and make a knife without all of the extra tools. It's amazing. It's really easy. I did it, my first knife. You can go back. I'm going to leave a link for that in the description below. You can go back and watch my very first knife that I made on the channel. It was with a file, a Nicholson file, and I didn't have to heat treat it. So it is something that you can do pretty easily. Now, if you're going to heat treat it, the heat treat process is super simple, because this isn't something that was ever used as a hammer. This isn't something that was ever used as a pry bar. This isn't something that has ever received a ton of stress to it, bending, flexing, things like that. So, if you were going to heat treat this, you don't have to do normalizing cycles. You don't even have to do a really complicated heat treat and quench process. You will see, and if you get a chance, go and look at plenty of people's file videos and stuff like that, so where they made knives out of files, you will see that almost every single one of them have a different Kohler temp or temperature on their blades whenever they're going into their oil. You'll see dull reds, dull oranges, bright oranges, the actual tone that the blade is going into the oil. You will see so many different variations of heat in the blade when it goes into oil. Some of that has to do with lighting. Some of them are quenching outside, some of them are quenching inside, some of them are quenching in caves and no lights on, all that stuff. So there's going to be a lot of differences between the way the temps look whenever they're going into the oil. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you my process, the things that I'm looking for whenever I go through and do this, so that hopefully y'all will be able to replicate it in your own shops without having to use a thermometer, like a crazy electric thermometer or thermocoupler or a heat treat oven or any of those things. If you got yourself a forge, you got yourself some oil, I'm going to hopefully make it to where y'all can replicate this process. So, for me, in my shop, all I have is one dangling light bulb. That's it. It's just an LED light bulb. It's semi sort of bright-ish. It counts as a light, but it ain't bright. And that's all I have, because it gives me a pretty true idea of what my heat looks like on my steel. Now, I'm going to tell you the tones that I'm looking for, all of those things, so that, again, hopefully y'all can replicate this with just your eyes, okay? And these are things that I want you to try out with pieces of steel so that you can figure out exactly what those tones look like. I've put in a lot of work to figure this out. Now, when it comes to me heat treating this, what I'm going to end up doing for one is I'm going to be quenching in Parks 50. I'm going to treat this kind of sort of like 1095, and I'm going to be quenching it in Parks 50. Now, when it comes to the heat process, like I said, you don't need to normalize this. It has not been forged, it has not been put through the ringer, especially because a lot of y'all are going to be making knives out of brand new files and brand new Farrier's rasps. I'll tell you, a lot of people hate that. But you're going to be making them that way because you're going to go down to the store, you're going to go down to your Tractor Supply store, something like that, and you're going to grab some Farrier rasps and you're going to go and you're going to make a knife. But you don't have to normalize it, so all we're doing is heat treating it. Now, my process is I'm going to be bringing this up to right in between a bright red and a low orange, okay? That is the color that I'm visually going to be looking at to get to, and I'm going to be quenching at that temp. Now, because I'm going to treat this kind of sort of like 1095, I will be leaving it in for a little bit of a soak time. So it'll be in there maintaining that temp-ish for about 2.5 to 3 minutes. So the process for most of the knives that I'm heat treating in my shop with the lighting that I have, whenever you get up to a dull red transitioning into a bright red, that is going from from magnetic to non-magnetic. Whenever it's a red-ish, the magnet is not going to stick. Whenever you're going into that bright red, it's absolutely not going to stick. So my temp that I'm going to try and quench this at is right at about 1500 degrees. Okay? Now we're going to bring it up to, like I said, that transition between a red and an orange, okay, and a dull orange. My goal is that whenever I bring it out of the forge and go into the oil, by the time I get to the oil, it's right at that 1500 degrees. Now, for me, the way that I'm going to heat soak it, I am going to bring it up to that temp to where I can visually see that I'm transitioning from that bright red to a dull orange, and then I'm going to take my propane and I'm going to turn it almost all the way to off, because before I even put my knife into my forge, I'm going to turn the forge on and I'm going to let the whole entire forge and the baffle get fully up to temp. So all of the bricks in there are going to be glowing. Now the reason behind that is whenever I turn my heat down, my bricks are retaining all of that heat. So while my knife is in there, it's going to stay pretty consistent at that heat for at least a few minutes. Let it soak. Still going to have the propane going a little bit. There'll still be some heat keeping it in there. We're going to let it be there, and then we're going to come out, we're going to inspect it, make sure that it's still that temp, and if it is, we're going into our oil. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is, let's say you pull it out of the forge and it's slightly too hot. All you got to do is give it a second outside the forge, it's going to start cooling a little bit, and then go into your oil. You'll see a lot of people on the whole Forged in Fire show where they pull it out, that bad boy's glowing orange, and the judges are like, holy shit, he's going to go into the oil like that? And they go, forge, bah, straight into the oil. You don't want to do that, okay? If you pull it out and it's slightly too hot, it's okay. Let it cool for a second, then go into your oil. You don't have to put it back in the forge, turn things down, hope and pray that you didn't mess it up, start it from scratch. Just let it cool a hair, put it back into the oil. Okay? That's all you gotta do. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go out into the shop and we're gonna start this heat treat process. And I know that this was a long intro, but I really wanted to explain to y'all what makes this simple and I didn't want y'all distracted by the actual flames and stuff. Okay, so let's jump out in the forge and let's get y'all distracted by flames. So now the forge is fully up temp. We have our blade in there, and we're going to bring it up to that just where it starts transitioning from the red to the dull orange. Then we're going to leave it at that temp for a few minutes. Then we're going to pull it out and we're going to quench it in our Parks 50. Right now we need to bring it up to temp. And I'm going to show you what that color looks like inside my shop, where, like I said, all we have is one light right above us, and that's it. So things that are in this shop tend to look hotter than they actually are, but those are the temps that I know are correct for what we're going to be doing. So you'll actually see that when we start pulling it out, you'll see the temp that I'm actually going for visually. So I want to show y'all something real quick. Right now, we're at this temp right here. Barely magnetic. It's a little bit magnetic right here, but that is a dull red. We're still a little magnetic. So we're going to go back in, and I'm going to show you what it hits whenever it ends up being non-magnetic. So I'm going to show you the difference between the tones. That was a dull red. We're going to go to the next tone, and you're going to see it then. So at this point right here, we're going to be non-magnetic. That's this temp that you see right there. On camera, it looks kind of orangey, but that is a brighter red. We're going to go back in, and we're going to go to the point that you're actually going to see that transition from that red to a more orange shade. Alright, so now I'm going to show you the temp that I'm really looking for to keep it at. That's going to be this temp right here, where it's just that shade transitioning from the red to the orange. That's what we're going to be going for. So I'm going to get it back in there, get it back to that temp, and then we're going to tone everything down and keep it that temp for a few minutes, and then we're going to quench. So now that we're at that temp, we're going to go ahead and start turning our propane down so that it's still keeping a little bit of a flame in there. But as you can see, the whole entire inside of that forge is still nice and hot. So it's going to keep that blade a consistent tone for us the entire time. So we're going to let it hang out in there for just a little bit, about 2.5 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and quench it. Alright, we've had it in there for about 2.5 minutes now. We're ready to go ahead, come out, and then quench. And whenever you're seeing that in the camera, it looks hotter than it is. But that right there is what I was going for, that transition from that red into the orange. Not exactly bright orange, but that transition. That's what I'm going for. We're going to agitate this, so we're going straight in, straight out. We're not pulling our blade out, we're just moving it around in there. We're not moving it side to side, we're not swirling it around. We're just going straight in, straight out, agitating, and we're bringing it down to temp. You don't want to just quench it, then pull it out of the oil and call it done. You want to let it be in here for a little bit, let it get that temp down, and then we can go ahead and pull it out. Alright, that's where we're at right there. Now what I tend to do is I'll go through and I'll scrape off the forge scale that we have right here with a wire brush, and then take it in there and file test it after we've let it cool for just a little bit. So that's where we're at. We'll go back into the other shop and talk for a second. So now we're going to take what I use as a chainsaw file. This is something a lot of people are going to have. Not everybody's going to have one of the HRC files to see the actual hardness of it. People are going to have things like a chainsaw file. I typically use this over a flat file because it cuts through any decarb really quick and lets me know if I've got a hardened edge. And I do. That kind of like tingy noise, you want to hear that loud high-pitched noise. That's what we're going for. Because you got that versus, let's take something that's not hardened. Hear how it's that dull noise? Or you can hear it bite into it. That is way different than this. So that's what you're trying to go for right there. I'm going to bring y'all back up to the top here and talk to y'all for a second about a few things that we're going to do after this part. Well, at this point, hopefully y'all are still with me so that I can tell you the next steps in this process. So of course, we've done the heat treat process where we've quenched it, but that's not the end. That is not the end of the heat treat process. So what we need to do now is go ahead and put this in the oven. We're just going to use my simple oven that I have in here. We're going to put it in there at 400 degrees for 2 hours. Now, I'm really not looking for any particular tone. A lot of people will tell you, even me in my previous videos, would have told you to look for that straw color. You can look for that. It is a good telltale sign if you're at the right temp for your temper. But if you happen to see purples and blues and things like that, some of that's misleading. It could be oils on the blade from quenching, fingertips, skin oils, all that stuff can give you a false sense of, oh damn, I overheated it. If you put it in an oven at 400 degrees, it doesn't matter if it's in there for 2 hours or not, or more. I shouldn't say or not, because if you only put it in there for 10 minutes, that's not long enough. But if you have it in there for 3 hours or 4 hours or something like that, it's not a big deal. It's not going to get hotter than 400 degrees. Just like any pan or pot or cookware in your oven, it's going to be 400 degrees the whole entire time because the oven is 400 degrees. Now, if you're thinking about, well, food burns, well, food's not the steel that the thing is in. That thing stays the same temp the whole entire time. But the actual cookware that you have it in. So same thing for a piece of steel. If you have it in there for 4 hours or you accidentally leave it in there for 5 hours, it's not going to really hurt anything because it's not going to go above 400 degrees. If that makes sense, hopefully it does. So what I'm going to do, 400 degrees for 2 hours. Now I've got it in this contraption right here. This is what I typically put them in, especially if I have a little bit of a warp or something like that. I'll put them in this little contraption that we have here. It's just a piece of angle iron with some of my clamps and everything on there. I'm using my my plunge line jig right here because it helped get it exactly where I wanted it to be flat-wise and all that. But doing that, got a couple of clamps. We did pick up the slightest little warp, which sometimes happens with Farrier's Rasp knives because of the way that the pattern is different on both sides. Sometimes you'll warp to one side or the other depending on how much material was removed going from one side to the other in order to create that file and rasp pattern. So yeah, I put it in here because I need to straighten it just a little bit, and we're going to do the straightening process while we're tempering in the oven with the jig here. So whenever it comes out of this oven, it should be nice and straight, and then we're done. That is the heat treat process. So let's recap real quick. Now, we started the heat treat process. Got our forge up to temp, got our steel to the visual color that we were wanting, which for me on this blade was that transition from a red to a low orange. At that point, we turned our forge down, let our fully temperature heated up forge keep the steel that consistent Kohler that we were looking for 2.5 to 3 minutes, and then we pulled it out and we quenched it in Parks 50, got a nice hardened edge. That was the process there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take it, put it on our little piece of angle iron, put it in our oven for 400 degrees for 2 hours, call it good. That is the heat treated process for a file knife, especially one like what I'm doing right here. Hopefully that's something that y'all can try and replicate in your own shops without the fear of overheating or underheating or trying to go out and buy expensive thermometers and all that stuff. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, let me know in the comment section down below. Guys, if y'all do a different heat treat process for y'all's files or Farrier's Rasp knife, make sure y'all put that in the comment section as well, because all that info is helpful for new knife makers. So there you go. Thank y'all for coming by. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it, or one of my other videos. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel. At 25,000 subscribers, we are doing a giveaway for the Nesmith knife that we forged out of the scrap piece of 1084. Guys, thank y'all for coming by. Thank y'all for spending your time with me. Y'all have an amazing day. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll catch y'all next time.